The trade volumes, if I look at the last reports, for COMESA report and DSC reports for 2012, the trade volumes were up 40% in 2 years. I'm not sure any place, even higher than the growth in Europe, higher than the growth in the Middle East. It means that we are interconnected in the region. That's what we should exploit.
Total trade in East Africa is valued at just over $50 billion, with imports accounting for 72% of this amount. This trade is heavily reliant on the port of Mombasa and that of the Dar es Salaam port through the Northern Corridor and the Central Corridor respectively. How easy is it to clear goods at this port? How is the infrastructure system around them? And is there opportunity for more? Hello and welcome to this week's episode of East African Voices. I'm your host Laban Cliff from Serio. Join me now as we seek answers to these questions as we look at the efficiency of the East African ports.
Historical advantages such as the sharing of the East African ports and harbours have played out to be an advantage to the East African Community member states to date by boosting inter-regional trade. The once sharing of this transport infrastructure facilitates movement of people, goods, capital and services, making up the four freedoms behind the formation of the East African Community.
We've seen intra-EAC trade grow by over 25, 26%, depending on how you calculate it, the fastest growing on our continent, if not in the world. We have seen foreign direct investment more than double over this decade. And the quality of this trade is mainly in manufactured products, unlike trade with the rest of the world, which is in raw materials.
This has been facilitated by a natural resource which connects three countries through Kenya, Uganda and Tanzania. These include the Lake Victoria, which connects the three countries at Mwanza, Kisumu and Port Bell. However, even as trade volumes continue to point northwards, the state of infrastructure on the inland ports is on the reverse. In our tour of Port Bell in Luzira, the site of rusty ships that have been left for the wrath of oxygen and water can be seen. In our visit, we found pockets of people engaging in ship loading activities. Take for instance this ship that docked from Tanzania ferrying poultry food from Mwanza. It was the only cargo ship being served at the time.
We had 3 wagon ferries in Uganda. Kenya Railways owns 1 wagon ferry, and Marine Services in Tanzania owns another. At one time, we were servicing all the 3 wagon ferries, and we were able to carry up to 60,000 tons a month through the ports. So that's not really the major constraint at the moment. However, if the volumes grow bigger, then we would have a constraint. That's why we are thinking of a second port east of Port Bell.
Uganda's keen development of a new port in Bukasa could see the country enhance trade between it and its neighbors. The landlocked nature of Rwanda, Burundi and Uganda has endeared the three countries through a strong reliance on the port infrastructure.
It's clear that we need to build the infrastructure that will enable us what I will call the first-class infrastructure that will facilitate that trade. But infrastructure is not sufficient in itself. In addition to that hard infrastructure, we need to work very closely on the soft infrastructure, on making sure that we are facilitating trade between all East African countries.
It is estimated that over 90% of trade volumes between these countries is sourced from the ports and mainly transported via road. In 2012, Burundi's rate of importation stood at 4% per annum and has placed the country in need of a strong infrastructural network.
Burundi, being a landlocked, there is also quite a significant progress and achievement in unlocking the landlockedness of the country.
This representation displays the road transport network pattern followed by member states in cargo shipment. This is the Northern Corridor, describing the line of transportation stemming from the Mombasa port. The Northern Corridor stems from Mombasa to Nairobi to Kampala and finally ends at Kigali, Rwanda, a distance estimated to be just at least 2,000 kilometers. Launched earlier this year, the Central Corridor stems from the port of Dar es Salaam, serving Tanzania and Burundi under its neighbors. This is the port of Dar es Salaam. It measures about 2,000 meters and has 11 berths, which are ship docking areas. Due to its strategic location towards the south of Africa, the port serves countries such as Malawi, Uganda, Zambia and Congo.
Our capacity has kept on increasing in terms of traffic throughput. For example, we've got the annual growth, traffic growth of about 13% every year, which is very encouraging, and we hope that trend is going to continue because of the many factors. One of the factors is the efficiency of Dar es Salaam port.
It's a busy affair here at the port of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. The port handles close to about 1,500 containers in a day and 4 large car carrier ships in a week. As you can see behind me, there's a ship that's arrived from South Korea. With it carries cars from the country destined for Tanzania and other African countries.
Dwell time, which is the estimated time a container takes before it's cleared, is estimated to stand at 5 days, which is lower than the allowable world average of 7 days.
We are working very closely with our stakeholders, the shipping lines, the credit forward agents. We've even come to the stage of computerization of port facilities, including our stakeholders like Tanzania Revenue Authority. They've almost computerized all their processes in terms of cargo clearance, which is, we hope, will have impact in the reduction of dwell time.
We had some challenges years back, especially if I go back to 2009, where the port was fully congested because of having this transshipment cargo, export and importation cargoes were a huge number of containers. And the government informed the committee what it was called a port decongestion committee that was established by the head of state. And then whereby we came up with by that time, the clearance dwell time was almost 21 days and above because of that congestion and stuff. And then the committee came up with the new ideas of establishment of the ICDs. Now the port, all the consignment comes into the port, they just transfer to the ICDs to decongest the port. And that did a tremendous improvement of dwell time. So it came down from above 21 days up to 9 up to 11 days.
The Port of Mombasa is East Africa's largest and busiest port in cargo capacity and ship accommodation. It can take up to 19 large carrier ships simultaneously. Shippers plying both the Central and Northern Corridor have mixed reactions on what entirely is an efficient port. Meet the managing director of IMA Burundi, a logistics company located in Bujumbura. We sought his trade rating on the performance of the Northern and Central Corridor.
Once the vessel arrives in Kenya and is charged, within 24 hours, you can load your container on truck and go. While in Tanzania, you will take minimum of 3 to 5 days. Sometimes more.
This port, if it was as efficient as maybe Mombasa port, it could actually handle more cargo than even Mombasa actually. So there is something that has been done.
The African Development Bank notes that the charges for East Africa's ports are nearly twice as expensive compared to global average. The container traffic at the port is also more than the intended design capacity.
There's no reason why our ports cannot compete with the ports in Singapore, for example. I'm not saying it should happen tomorrow, but certainly that should be the target. If Singapore, such a small country, is able to be so efficient in their port operations, why can't our countries do the same?
In the year 2014, courtesy of Trademark East Africa, stakeholders in cargo handling signed a port charter which is a vow to embark on boosting efficiency at the Mombasa port.
The Kenya Ports Authority Strategic Plan.
Among the resolutions, the pillars of the port charter signing were anchored around the acceleration of potential of the Northern Corridor. The 4 pillars were the Kenya Revenue Authority tax collection model, port efficiency improvement, driving planned initiatives, and facilitating regulation and oversight engagement of trade processes.
It is not enough for us just to expand and improve infrastructure. We must also look to our policies, processes, and systems with a fresh eye to see what we can improve and what, indeed, we must discard. That is why when in June last year, I issued a directive ordering the streamlining of port operations, the chief aim of that directive was to cut transit times from Mombasa to Malaba from 18 days, as it was before, to 5. Indeed, it was encouraging to see that we reached that target in very little time, and I believe that the lesson is that dedicated management, good systems, and processes are as important as the infrastructure that we build. All stakeholders in the port, with the support of our good friends Trademark East Africa, have indeed come together and prepared a port charter to consolidate the gains of that earlier directive. The charter commits parties, both from public and private sectors, to measures that will increase the efficiency of the port and our entire Northern Corridor. It also sets out in clear detail initiatives that we expect to play a substantial part in unlocking the trade potential, the integration of all port community member systems into the Kenya National Electronic Single Window System, and the achievement of 70% cargo output through the Green Channel by 2016. The achievement here is not simply putting these ambitious goals on paper. Rather, in bringing stakeholders to these mutual commitments, we are establishing a culture of performance measured against agreed goals and timelines.
The single customs union, spearheaded by member states, and a single window system where shippers clear goods from a central location have also presented low-hanging fruit for shippers and government alike.
I've seen a lot of improvements in Mombasa, from setting up single window systems in Mombasa to reducing clearance times to 10 days. The president wants to bring this down even further to about 5 days maximum. The Port of Mombasa is doing the same.
Strikingly, both ports have embarked on an expansion drive. Tanzania is expected to fork out $11 billion in investment at the port of Bagamoyo, and Kenya is focused on dredging the port of Lamu. Seeing the level of capacity needed and the current state of East Africa's port system, an infrastructural deficit exists.
Kenya has to be a hub, and so as we're improving the port, we can't improve the port and the port facilities and get all the goods and then they're stuck there. We have to also improve the access outside the port. The roads and the rail are very important for us.
As Trademark East Africa's head of infrastructure admits, infrastructural output is critical for trade to take place.
Without infrastructure, as blood vessels running for the economy, the countries are dead.
In terms of infrastructure, the ports are critical because those are the ones which facilitate what goes out and what comes in. And if that can be done efficiently and competitively, then you are sure that we are moving. And more importantly, it is the railways which we neglected. Because once we improve the ports, then what goes into the ports or comes out of the port has to go onto the railway. You cannot transform these economies by road transport. It will not work. Road transport can only complement what the railway system carries. And I think our governments have recognized that, and they are doing that. We have to go back and modernize our railways, make them modern, make our ports modern.
We're going on a commercial break on East African Voices. More on the efficiency of the East African ports after the break.
East African Voices.
With only 2 of the East African Community member states having close access to the seafront, this has endeared the other countries to trade via roads, with 95% of imports and exports of these countries coming in via the road infrastructure. How has this positioned the logistics companies in East Africa?
Transport costs within the region still very expensive. We need more players in the transport sector, but also just in convoyage, having really modern logistics facilities at ports, including dry ports. We need that is an important cost component in our exports.
What the government has done is to invest a lot in terms of logistics to ensure that there's free movement of goods and people. When you talk of logistics, they're expanding the airport, which means we're going to get more flights into Rwanda. They're also planning to, it is actually in the pipeline, to build another airport in Rwanda. So all that is going to bring more flights into Rwanda, hence more cargo for both exports and imports.
Taking into question the development of rail and road network. 95% of cargo traffic from both seaports and inland ports is via the road network. In a feasibility study by the African Development Bank, poor connection to the hinterland is also partly to blame for the high cost of cross-regional trade, as routes outside of the ports are congested.
Infrastructure is the biggest non-tariff barrier to trade in East Africa. It's been estimated that over $43 billion, just that gap.
Imagine all these trucks coming out of the port of Mombasa, then heading out to meet such roads. Could this be a hindrance in trading? Burundi's location has placed it farthest from the ocean, and seeing that it's a net importer, cost of cargo transportation is the highest compared to other countries. Could the dilapidated road network mean that East Africans can only leverage on the rail?
We let the railroads collapse, and then the roads are, I would say they have not even taken over, they're taken over rail. They are just being overused, and that's why they don't last. Because it's a lot of traffic that goes on the road, and some of it is very heavy. And with the overloading, it's increased the destruction of the road. So the amount of money we are going to be putting in maintaining the road system is much higher than if we use some of it to get a good railway working.
We estimate cargo in East Africa to more than triple in the next 15 years or so. And there is no way we shall be able to triple the roads network. It's impossible with all the goodwill in the world. Rail currently carries less than 10% of our cargo. And so our industrialization cannot occur unless we invest heavily in rail, which is why the Summit of Heads of State in 2012 prioritized rail, upgrading and development, including the laying of the new standard gauge rail, which has happened in Kenya. Tanzania are upgrading the current rail. They have plans to lay rail, standard gauge rail, to link Dar es Salaam to Isaka, Kigali and Bujumbura. And of course then we have the Lapsset corridor, which also has a rail component.
Improvements in the ports, to a very large extent, do not require huge capital investments. It's organizational. We should be able to provide a leadership in some of these institutions, which make these institutions sufficiently efficient and effective, and making the required contribution to our economies.
Seeing that the Dar es Salaam and Mombasa port present potential, with prospects hanging in the balance for other ports that will come on board. Could East Africa leverage on inland port to also boost trade among member countries?
Uganda obviously is a disadvantaged country in terms of accessibility to the sea. And therefore it is absolutely important for us to ensure that we get access to the sea to enable movement of goods, both exports and imports, and people without any problem. And this is why we are concentrating on development of infrastructure, and the decisions taken in November 2012 in Nairobi on the infrastructure priorities, including the standard gauge railway line, which is not only for Uganda, but which will also extend to Rwanda and Burundi. And we're also in the process of looking at development of a highway that will start from Mombasa all the way to Burundi. This is in an effort to try and ease the movement of our people, and also further integrate our people through easy communication and transport. We are also looking at a route from Tanga through Arusha, Musoma, up to our Bokassa port on the side of Lake Victoria in Uganda. And a further central line is being developed to go through Tanzania to Rwanda and Burundi. Now this is important for those countries like Uganda, Burundi and Rwanda, which are landlocked, that we have to find routes that can ease movement of our people and goods, and therefore encourage trade within and without the community.
For a region that imports more than it exports, efficiency at the East African ports is important to ensure a reduction in the cost of doing business in the region, with policy players targeting less than 24 hours dwell times at the ports. That's all we had for you on East African Voices this week. Interact with us through the social media pages on your screen, and send us an email through the email address on your screen. Till same time next week, this has been East African Voices.